For as long as you've been alive, it's just been there. The little red and blue trucks. The letter carrier walking up your street. The mailbox on the corner you've probably stopped noticing. Canada Post has delivered to this country for over 350 years, in every kind of weather, to towns so remote no private company would ever bother. It felt permanent, the way a road or a river feels permanent. But behind that quiet routine, something has gone badly wrong. The company is now losing money at a rate of several $billions, bleeding cash faster than almost anyone realizes, kept alive only by government lifelines and a business model that the internet quietly made obsolete years ago. The letters stopped coming. The parcels went to Amazon. And now the country is being forced to ask a question it never thought it would. What happens when the mail itself can't afford to survive? To understand how an institution this old, this woven into the fabric of the country, ended up on financial life support, you have to understand what Canada Post was actually built to be. Because it was never designed to make money. It was designed to hold a country together. The story doesn't start with a corporation. It starts with a colony. Mail service on this land predates the country itself, running back to 1753, when Benjamin Franklin, yes, that Benjamin Franklin, was appointed deputy postmaster for the northern British colonies. For the next 2 centuries, the mail was a government department, plain and simple. A clerk in Ottawa, a stamp, a bag on a train. It wasn't a business. It was a public service funded by the Treasury, expected to lose money the way a lighthouse loses money. Nobody asked whether the lighthouse turned a profit, and the mandate that came with it was staggering. Deliver to everyone, not the profitable addresses. Everyone. The farmhouse at the end of a gravel road in Saskatchewan. The fishing village in Newfoundland you can only reach by ferry. The community in Nunavut with no road connecting it to anywhere. A private courier looks at those addresses and sees a rounding error, a delivery that costs $40 to make and earns $1. Canada Post was legally obligated to make it anyway. That obligation had a name, universal service. One country, one price, every door. For a long time, the math sort of worked. Not because the far-flung routes were profitable, they never were, but because the profitable stuff paid for them. And the profitable stuff, for most of the 20th century, was letters. Billions of them. Think about what the mail carried in 1985. Your phone bill came in the mail. Your bank statement came in the mail. Your paycheck, your tax refund, your checks to the landlord, your birthday cards, your magazine subscriptions, the flyers, the catalogs, the love letters, the hate letters, the jury summons. Every single piece of paper that moved information from one Canadian to another moved through a Canada Post facility. And every single one of them had a stamp on it. In 1981, the government made a decision that would define everything to come. It took the Post Office Department and turned it into a crown corporation, Canada Post Corporation. The idea was that it should behave more like a business, cover its own costs, stop leaning on the Treasury. On paper, it made perfect sense. Modernize the dinosaur. Make it stand on its own 2 feet. But that decision quietly rewired the entire logic of the institution. Because the moment you tell a service it must cover its own costs, you tie its survival to its most profitable product. And its most profitable product was the letter. As long as Canadians kept mailing billions of letters a year, the machine hummed. The letters subsidized the ferry routes. The stamps paid for the farmhouse at the end of the gravel road. For a couple of decades, it held. Canada Post posted profits through much of the 90s and 2000s. It returned money to its shareholder, the federal government, year after year. It looked, for a while, like the experiment had worked. A public institution that paid for itself. And then the thing that paid for everything simply stopped. The collapse of letter mail is one of the quietest catastrophes in Canadian business history. Because it didn't happen in a crash. It happened in a slow, grinding a slide that nobody wanted to look at directly. It started with email. Why mail a letter when you can send a message that arrives in a second and costs nothing? Then came online banking. Your statement became a PDF. Then online bill payment. The phone bill stopped arriving in an envelope. Then e-transfers killed the check. Then digital greeting cards, digital invoices, digital everything. Piece by piece. Every reason a Canadian ever had to buy a stamp got replaced by something free and instant. And the numbers are brutal. Canada Post delivered its peak volume of letter mail back in 2006, around 5.5 billion pieces that year. By the 2020s, that had collapsed by more than half. The average household that once received 7 or 8 pieces of mail a day now gets 2, and one of them is a flyer. Here's the part that makes this a death spiral rather than just a decline. The cost of the network barely changed. Canada Post still has to drive down your street. Whether it drops off 50 letters at your house or 0, the truck still comes, the carrier still walks, the fuel still burns, the pension still gets paid. The revenue evaporated, but the cost of showing up did not. So every year, the same enormous machine ran, and every year, less and less money flowed through it to justify running it. The company tried to plug the hole the way any business would. It raised the price of a stamp. Again and again. But you can't outprice a free alternative. Charging more for stamps, when people have simply stopped needing stamps, is like raising the toll on a bridge that everyone has stopped crossing. The people still crossing pay more, but there are fewer of them every year, and the toll never catches up to the cost of the bridge. By the 2010s, the letter, the product that had paid for the entire universal service promise, was in freefall, and the machine that promise built was suddenly a machine with no engine. Now, if you've ever wondered why a company can watch its main product die for 15 years and not simply pivot, the answer is the same reason these stories are so satisfying to untangle, and it's exactly the kind of slow-motion business collapse we dig into on this channel every week. So if you're the type who wants to understand why the institutions around you actually work the way they do us a quick favor and hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us, when was the last time you personally mailed a letter? Genuinely. Think about it, because your answer is the whole problem in a single data point. Now, back to it. Because here's the thing. Canada Post did see a lifeboat. As the letters died, something else exploded: parcels. E-commerce arrived, and suddenly Canadians weren't mailing each other paper anymore. They were ordering everything under the sun and having it shipped to their door. In theory, this was salvation. The letter business was dying, but a brand new package business was being born, and Canada Post already had the trucks, the carriers, the sorting plants, the routes to every address in the country. It had spent a century building the exact network that e-commerce needed. It should have owned the parcel war. It didn't. It's losing it. To understand why, look at who showed up to fight. Amazon didn't just become Canada Post's biggest customer. It became its biggest competitor. Amazon built its own logistics arm, its own delivery vans, its own network, and started cutting Canada Post out of the exact deliveries that were supposed to save it. And it wasn't alone. Purolator, UPS, FedEx, Intelcom, a swarm of nimble private couriers, all of them descended on the profitable urban routes, the dense city blocks where you can drop 40 packages in an afternoon without breaking a sweat. And this is the cruel geometry of Canada Post's situation. The competitors get to choose. They cherry-pick the downtown high-rises and the dense suburbs where delivery is cheap and volume is high. They are under no obligation whatsoever to drive to the farmhouse at the end of the gravel road. Canada Post is. So the private couriers skim the profitable cream, and Canada Post is left holding the expensive, unprofitable routes it is legally forbidden from abandoning, while also trying to compete for the profitable ones it's now losing. It's fighting with one hand tied behind its back, against opponents who wrote their own rules. And then there's the labor. Canada Post is one of the most heavily unionized workforces in the country. with tens of thousands of employees, generous contracts, and a pension obligation that runs into the billions. Those are commitments made in the era of billions of letters, commitments that assumed the letter money would always be there to pay for them. The private couriers carry none of that weight. Many of them run on contractors and gig drivers with a fraction of the overhead. So Canada Post is trying to win a price war on parcels while carrying a cost structure built for a business that no longer exists. The result has been a series of increasingly bitter labor disputes, rolling strikes, rotating walkouts, a full national work stoppage that froze the entire system in the middle of a holiday shipping season, the single most important time of the year for parcels. And every time the mail stops, something quietly devastating happens. Canadians discover they can live without it. They rode around it. They find another courier, another app, another way. And they don't always come back. Every strike doesn't just cost revenue that week. It teaches the country another lesson in how to not need Canada Post at all. Now let's talk about the number that actually matters, because this is where struggling turns into quietly going bankrupt. Canada Post has been posting operating losses year after year, and those losses have not been small. In recent years, the corporation has bled through hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and by the 2020s, the cumulative picture had deteriorated to the point where the losses since 2018 stacked up into the billions. A company that once returned profit to the government is now a company that cannot pay its own way, and the only reason it hasn't collapsed is that the government keeps stepping in. Ottawa has had to hand Canada Post financial lifelines just to keep the trucks running, repayable funding, injections of cash, arrangements to keep it solvent through the next quarter and then the next. Strip those lifelines away, and the honest word for Canada Post's financial position is insolvent. It is a corporation that, on its own, cannot cover its own costs, and everyone who looks at the books knows it. Which brings us to the thing you may have already noticed on your own street. Look closely and you'll see it. The door-to-door delivery is disappearing. For decades, the letter carrier walked up your steps and put the mail through your slot. Now, across huge swaths of the country, that's been replaced by the community mailbox, the big gray cluster of locked boxes at the end of the block that you have to walk to yourself. Canada Post framed this as modernization. What it actually is retreat. Every conversion from your door to a shared box on the corner is the institution quietly admitting it can no longer afford to do the thing it was built to do. The service isn't just losing money. It's visibly shrinking one street at a time. And here is the trap at the center of all of it, the reason there's no easy fix. Canada Post is bound by that universal service obligation. It cannot simply stop delivering to the unprofitable places. It cannot become Amazon and only serve the dense, lucrative routes. Its entire reason for existing is to serve the places nobody else will. But that obligation is also the anchor dragging it under, because the profitable product that used to pay for it, the letter, is gone and never coming back. So the institution is caught between two impossibilities. It cannot become a normal business, because a normal business would abandon half the country. And it cannot survive as it is, because the money that funded the promise has evaporated. Every proposed solution, cut delivery days, closed rural post offices, end door-to-door entirely, raise stamp prices again, is really just a different way of breaking the promise that the whole thing was built on. So what does it mean when the mail itself can't afford to survive? Because this was never really just about letters and parcels. Canada Post is one of those institutions Canadians never chose to love and never thought they'd have to defend, like the road, like the river. Just part of the country's furniture. It was the physical proof that no matter where you lived, no matter how remote, the country still reached you. The stamp cost the same in downtown Toronto as it did in a village of 200 people in the territories. That was the point. That was the quiet, radical promise buried inside a boring government service that you were not too far away to matter. What's dying isn't really the letter. It's that promise. And the uncomfortable truth is that Canadians helped kill it. Every email instead of a letter, every e-transfer instead of a check, every Amazon order routed to a private van, every strike we shrugged off and worked around. We stopped mailing things, and then we acted surprised that the mail ran out of money. The internet didn't murder Canada Post in a single blow. We did it slowly, conveniently, one skipped stamp at a time, and we never noticed we were doing it. The trucks are still running. The carriers are still walking, for now. The mailbox is still on the corner. It still feels permanent. But permanent is exactly what every dying institution feels like, right up until the morning it isn't. But what do you think? Should the government keep the lifelines coming and treat Canada Post like the lighthouse it used to be, a public service that's allowed to lose money because the country needs it? Or is it time to admit the letter era is over and let the mail become something smaller, cheaper, and more brutal about which doors it's willing to knock on? And be honest, when was the last time you actually needed the mail for anything that couldn't have been an email? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.